She didn't walk in looking like a boss. There was no sharp-heeled clique, no entourage flanking her sides, no blazer with gold buttons. Just a woman in a hoodie olive green, no logo quietly stepping through the polished revolving doors of a five-star hotel she had built from the ground up. No one turned to look. No one offered help, and at the front desk they saw her coming and decided she wasn't the type. She wasn't wealthy enough, wasn't important enough, wasn't white enough. But what they didn't bother to know, was that her name was carved into the foundation of the very building they worked in. That every suite, every chandelier, every square inch of imported marble existed because of the woman they had just dismissed. They didn't see a CEO. They saw a black woman in a hoodie, and in a world that still worships appearance more than truth. That was enough to make them say, "I'm sorry, we're full guests only." She didn't argue. She didn't flash a badge. She didn't need to. She made one phone call, and within minutes, the power structure in that hotel lobby began to collapse. This isn't just a story about customer service gone wrong. It's not just a story about a mistaken identity. It's about what happens when quiet strength meets loud ignorance. It's about what it means to walk through the world wearing the wrong color, the wrong clothes, the wrong assumptions stacked against you. It's about a black story hidden behind a hoodie and the silent power that speaks without shouting. So if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't belong, stay with us. Because this time they made the wrong assumption, and she made sure they'd never forget it. The revolving doors of Crescent Oaks turned slowly, almost ceremonially, as Denise Hollister stepped into the grand marble-floored lobby. It smelled like money-polished brass jasmine oil diffusers and just a whisper of imported leather. For anyone else, it was an entrance into luxury. For Denise, it was a homecoming, but nobody looked up. Not the concierge stationed like a statue near the fountain. Not the bellboy who had just opened the door for a family dripping in designer ski gear. Not the two middle-aged men sipping bourbon near the fireplace, comparing golf scores and second homes. Denise paused for a moment, scanning the familiar space. The crystal chandelier above still cast 1,000 fractured lights across the lobby. The velvet green couches had been her idea, a soft contrast to the sterile architecture. She noticed a new sculpture near the elevator bank, modern, angular, cold. She made a mental note to ask the board who approved it. She walked in silence, soft-soled loafers barely making a sound against the Italian marble. Her hoodie was zipped up halfway, a dark olive green that blended with the shadows. No logo, no label, just warmth. Over one shoulder, she carried a canvas tote with a book, her laptop in a single folder marked Q4 board docs. The lobby felt the same, but the eyes inside it didn't see her. Or rather, they saw her and didn't register her worth. Behind the desk, a young woman, white early 20s, thin gold jewelry AirPods barely hidden beneath her blonde bun, was tapping acrylic nails on the keyboard as if decoding the secrets of the universe. Denise stood before her and waited. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't wave. Finally, the woman glanced up. "Yes, can I help you?" Her voice was polite but practiced, the kind of tone reserved for outsiders. Denise returned the smile gently. "Checking in, Hollister." Denise. Click-clack, a few keystrokes, a frown. "I don't see a reservation under that name." "That's all right," Denise said calmly. "There should be a suite under ownership, executive hold." A pause. The receptionist raised one eyebrow. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we're actually at full capacity tonight. We don't allow walk-ins unless it's an emergency, and even then, only confirmed guests." Her voice dipped ever so slightly. There was an edge now. The kind people used when they believed they had authority over you. Denise's smile didn't change, but she did shift slightly, just enough to let her eyes fall on the gold plaque behind the desk. Crescent Oaks, a Hollister and Rowe property. Her name wasn't on the screen. "It was in the foundation, I understand," she said softly. but I believe you should check again. I'm Denise Hollister." The receptionist blinked. The silence stretched uncomfortable now. "I see," she said slowly. "Let me get a manager. No apology, no verification, no curiosity, just dismissal dressed in protocol." Ben Murray was the kind of man who wore his name tag like armor, assistant general manager. It read, though, the way he walked head-tilted, clipboard in hand, made it clear he imagined a promotion just around the corner. He approached with the exaggerated calm of someone who dealt with situations before. He saw Denise, registered the hoodie, the skin, the tote bag, made his calculations. "Good evening," he said with a corporate smile. "Having a little trouble with your reservation. She claims she owns the property." The receptionist added too loudly. Ben blinked, then chuckled. "Is that so?" Denise didn't flinch. "It is. My name is Denise Hollister. I'm not here for drama. I just need the key to my suite. You'll find it under the ownership block." Ben didn't move right away. His eyes scanned her face, searching for cracks, for hesitation, for something he could dismiss. He found none. Then he turned toward the back office, muttering something into a walkie clipped to his belt. Denise stood still. People were watching now. A woman in a red dress whispered to her husband. A man near the espresso bar leaned just slightly to the side, pretending not to listen. Denise didn't shift her weight, didn't check her phone, didn't look around, but inside she felt it again. That slow, bitter coil of fire in the chest. Not because she was rejected, but because it had happened before. And would happen again, because no matter how many towers bore her name, someone would still look at her and see less. The elevator dinged somewhere in the distance, a polished chime echoing through the hushed lobby. But Denise stayed rooted in place, her fingers lightly resting on the edge of the counter, like someone waiting for an apology that wouldn't come. Ben hadn't returned yet. She glanced at the receptionist, Kayla. The name tag read. The young woman was now hunched over her phone under the desk eyes darting across the screen. Googling, searching. The smirk from earlier was gone, replaced by a tightening of her jaw and a quick dart of the tongue across her lips. Denise could almost read her thoughts. No way, can't be her. That's not what a CEO looks like. And that's the thing. That's the part that always stung more than the refusal itself. It wasn't just that they didn't believe her. It was that they couldn't imagine someone like her, even deserving belief. Across the lobby, a family walked in, dragging high-end luggage, two kids still in ski boots, bickering about Wi-Fi. The doorman greeted them by name. Kayla straightened up instantly. Denise didn't move. She simply stepped back, reached into her tote bag and pulled out her phone. One tap, a single number. No hesitation. Yes, Crescent Oaks, Charlotte. I'm being denied access again. No, not angry, just tired. Please handle it. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. No drama, no shouting, just gravity. Then she turned and walked to the marble column by the coffee bar, not hiding, waiting. Still controlled like a storm paused just before the sky breaks. She didn't need backup, but she knew what was coming. It took less than 5 minutes. A murmur spread through the lobby as two figures in tailored suits stepped off the elevator, moving fast, focused, one in a gray pinstripe, the other in navy with a Crescent Oaks lapel pin. Both carried leather binders. Neither looked like they were there for room service. Kayla froze. Ben reappeared just as the suits crossed the lobby. His face dropped when he recognized them. Miles Hartley, Regional Director, Natalie Fong, Director of Operations. Natalie spotted Denise first and made a beeline toward her, already reaching out a hand. "Ms. Hollister, my God, we had no idea you were arriving today." Ben tried to interject. There was just a little confusion with Natalie, shot him a look that could silence a boardroom. Confusion, she repeated, then turned back to Denise. "Did someone ask you to wait?" Denise gave a half smile. I wasn't invited to wait. I was instructed to leave Kayla's face drained of color. She took a full step back from the desk. Miles leaned toward Ben, his voice a whisper that still carried weight. You knew her name. You heard her say it. Ben sputtered. She didn't have ID, and the system didn't show. You don't ask the owner for ID. Natalie snapped. You don't challenge her. You thank her for breathing in your hotel. The entire lobby had gone quiet now. A man near the fireplace lowered his newspaper. The couple by the fountain stopped sipping champagne. Even the jazz spilling softly from the ceiling speakers felt like it had taken a breath. This was no longer a customer service issue. It was a reckoning. Denise didn't gloat, didn't bask in the scene. She simply stepped forward, now flanked by Natalie and Miles. I'd like my key, please, she said, her voice quiet but firm, and a printout of the incident report. Kayla didn't respond. Natalie reached over the desk, typed in the override code herself, and printed 2 key cards. Ben stood off to the side, suddenly unsure where to place his clipboard. Denise turned toward the elevator, sliding the key into her coat pocket. Before she stepped in, she paused. Oh, and cancel the boardroom breakfast. I'll be attending in person tomorrow. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. She just disappeared behind the elevator doors, leaving behind a silence heavier than any scream could have managed. The suite on the 22nd floor hadn't changed much. Still faced north. Still had the view of the city skyline, glowing faintly beneath the dusk sky. Still smelled faintly of lavender thanks to the diffuser Denise herself had insisted every executive suite include. She tossed her tote bag on the chaise lounge and walked over to the window, hands in her pockets, hoodie still zipped posture, calm, but inside something stirred. Not rage, not even disappointment, just that dull, familiar ache that comes from being underestimated in the same room you paid to build. The Crescent Oaks wasn't just hers by title. It was hers in vision, brick blueprint, in soul. She had signed off on the lighting design, the layout of the suites, even the shape of the lobby chairs. She could still remember debating thread counts for the sheets while standing barefoot on a concrete slab during early construction. She built this place to be a sanctuary, and still to someone like Kayla. She'd just been another intruder in a hoodie. She walked to the minibar and poured herself a glass of water. No wine tonight, no indulgence. Not out of restraint, but out of intention. This wasn't a night for celebration. It was a night for remembering. She sat at the edge of the bed, the thick, cloud-soft duvet barely dipping under her weight. Her phone buzzed. A text from Natalie Board is being notified. Full incident report will be logged. We've already pulled camera footage. Denise stared at the message for a moment, then locked her phone. No need to respond, not tonight. She thought of a night years ago in Richmond, 2006, back when she was still being invited to meetings by accident and dismissed in them by design. She'd walked into a hotel conference room wearing heels that pinched, carrying a portfolio thicker than her entire resume, and been asked if she was there to set up the coffee cart. She'd smiled then too, not out of grace but necessity. Because if she had flinched, if she had let them see it sting, it would have validated every assumption in the room. And Denise Hollister had made a promise to herself long ago. If they were going to underestimate her, let it be their mistake to regret, not hers to carry. She stood again and walked back to the window, this time pulling the curtains just slightly, letting the city twinkle through the slits. Somewhere out there, Kayla was probably texting someone, panicking, Googling, maybe even crying. Ben was probably in a meeting with HR trying to defend himself with phrases like policy and lack of clarity. And yet Denise felt no vindication because this wasn't about them. This had never been about them. It was about the system that made their reaction so predictable. A woman in her 40s walking into her own property in a hoodie shouldn't have to summon the cavalry to be acknowledged. She shouldn't have to weaponize her title just to sleep in a room that bore her initials on the linen tags. But that was the truth of the world she moved through. And tonight was just another page in the same tired story. Her eyes lingered on her reflection in the glass, half city lights, half shadow. She saw the hoodie, the bare face, the quiet stance. Some people saw weakness in that, but Denise, she saw armor because every time they looked through her, they taught her how to stand taller, not louder, just taller. She reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it off. The suite fell into a soft darkness, the cityscape outside painting silver streaks across the ceiling. She lay back, arms crossed behind her head, heart finally slowing. Tomorrow the board would see her in person, and they'd know why. She wasn't there to make a statement. She was there to remind them without raising her voice, without calling attention to it, that true power never needed to ask for a seat at the table. It built the table. Ben Murray stood frozen just inside the staff hallway, the weight of what had just occurred sinking into his chest like wet concrete. The walkie clipped to his belt crackled softly, but he didn't hear it. His mind was stuck, looping the moment Denise Hollister said her name, her full name, clear, calm, inevitable. He'd smiled when she said it, more out of habit than anything, but somewhere behind that smile had been something else. Doubt, no dismissal. The kind you don't realize you're deploying until it's too late. The kind that doesn't come from hatred, but from programming, from years of seeing power, wear a certain face, speak in a certain tone, carry a certain posture, and she didn't match the image. She hadn't arrived with fanfare. She hadn't come dressed in prestige. She wore a hoodie. And that was all it took for his mind to decide. Not her. Ben had always prided himself on being good with people. But standing outside that marble lobby, clipboard loose in one hand, he realized something else. He was only good with the right people, and in that moment he hadn't thought she was one of them. That was his first real mistake, and it was only the beginning. 2 floors below, Kayla sat in the break room, her face drained of all color. The phone in her hand was open to a Google search. Denise Hollister, CEO, Crescent Oaks. The results were unmistakable. Her LinkedIn, a Forbes profile, a photo from a black tie gala last year, where Denise stood next to a U.S. senator, hand on hip, laughing in a velvet gown. Kayla scrolled further. Another article, from foster home to hospitality empire. The rise of Denise Hollister. Her throat felt dry. She looked up at Marcus, the night concierge, who stood leaning against the vending machine, sipping from a paper cup. "I think I just denied the owner of the hotel," she said quietly. Marcus didn't blink. "You think?" "No. I mean, I did." She showed him the screen. Marcus stared, then let out a low whistle. Damn, Kayla looked down at her lap. Her fingers trembled slightly. I thought she was someone's mom, or like, I don't know, trying to sneak a room." Marcus raised an eyebrow, because Kayla didn't answer. She didn't have to, he already knew. Upstairs, Denise sat cross-legged on the sofa in her suite, the city skyline painting reflections across the windows like distant ghosts. Her laptop was open but untouched. A document titled "The Quiet Room" blinked with a lonely cursor. She couldn't write yet. Not because she didn't have words, but because she had too many. Her mind swirled not with anger, but with something far deeper, weariness. That kind of bone-deep exhaustion that only comes from living the same moment 100 different ways she'd been here before. In boardrooms where assistants looked past her to shake hands with her male junior staffers, at awards ceremonies where she was misidentified as someone's date, in interviews where they asked if she ever wished she had a real business partner. It never got easier, only more familiar. Tonight wasn't special because of what happened. It was special because of where it happened. In her house, her sanctuary, her name was on the deed, her initials were etched into the brass behind the reception desk. And yet when she walked through those doors, hoodie on, no makeup, no theater, she was just another black woman in a space that didn't expect her to own it. That was the first strike, and it wasn't hers. It was theirs. She stood and walked to the mirror staring at her reflection. No, she didn't look like a Forbes cover today. No highlighter on her cheekbones, no blowout, just soft eyes, tired shoulders, and that familiar scar near her left brow. The one from a bike fall when she was 10. Denise leaned in, whispering to herself, "You still here." It wasn't affirmation, it was confirmation that despite every sideways glance, every mistaken identity, every quiet insult, she kept walking. She pulled the hoodie tighter around her shoulders, warm, safe, familiar. The same hoodie she wore the night she closed on her very first property, the one she kept not because of style, but because it reminded her where she started and why she'd never let anyone take that from her. Not Kayla, not Ben, not the whole damn industry. Outside her suite, the hallway buzzed faintly with muted sounds. Housekeeping carts rolling over plush carpet doors, softly clicking shut, the distant hum of an elevator descending. Inside, Denise Hollister moved deliberately, pulling out her notebook from the tote bag and flipping past pages of charts and numbers until she reached a blank one. She uncapped a pen and started writing not figures, not strategy, but memory. Not just what happened in the lobby, but what it meant. The page read October 4th, lobby dismissed again. She paused, then beneath it in block letters. She didn't see me because she didn't expect me to exist. That was the root of it. Denise wasn't angry that they didn't recognize her face. She never cared for celebrity. She was angry that her very presence had been deemed implausible, impossible. Even Kayla hadn't just missed a guest name. She had filtered Denise through an invisible algorithm that rejected her before the system could even load. That algorithm had a name. It was called bias. And in places like Crescent Oaks, it dressed itself up in professionalism, policies, protocols, all neat and neutral until you looked closer. Then you saw it for what it really was, a system built to recognize power only when it wore a white face and a three-piece suit. Downstairs, Ben stood in the service corridor now on his third phone call in less than 20 minutes. His voice was low, but the stress cracked through it in places. Yes, I understand. Of course I understand. I've already spoken with Natalie. I'm preparing a statement for corporate. No, we haven't filed the incident report yet. She hasn't given a directive. He paused, listening, sweat forming at his hairline. Despite the AC, sir, I'd like to formally apologize on behalf of, yes, I know. Yes, I realize who she is. When the call ended, he stood still, staring at the screen for a long moment. He thought about the way he had looked at her, Denise Hollister. It wasn't just that he hadn't believed her. It was that he had needed her to prove it. Like so many men before him, he'd mistaken his doubt for her responsibility. He didn't feel like a manager anymore. He felt like a child caught cheating on a test he didn't know he was taking. In the break room, Kayla scrolled through Denise's profile again. Videos, interviews, a speech at the Women of Color in Hospitality Conference. Denise stood at a podium, her voice low and precise, talking about power not as something granted, but as something reclaimed. Talking about the need for presence, the price of silence, the burden of being the first in a room full of people who didn't think you belonged. Kayla read the captions. She looked around the staff room, its peeling paint, its dented lockers, the laminated signs taped to the microwave, and felt like the air itself was watching her. I messed up, she whispered. Marcus looked up. We all do. The question is, what are you going to do after Kayla didn't answer? She wasn't sure yet. Upstairs, Denise sat back in the leather chair by the window, eyes closed, notebook still open in her lap. She was remembering a moment from long ago, her first bank meeting. She'd worn her mother's blazer, 2 sizes too big, still smelling faintly of rose perfume. The banker had asked her 3 times if she understood what capital gains meant before even opening her folder. She remembered the heat in her cheeks, the stillness in her hands, the decision not to storm out, but to sit straighter and explain the numbers twice. That had been the day she learned silence is not submission, it's strategy. The world mistook her quiet for a lack of strength, but silence was how she watched, how she measured, how she waited, and then when the moment came, she moved. She closed the notebook gently and stood stretching her back. The room was dark, now lit only by the flickering skyline. The hoodie still rested on the couch where she left it like a quiet sentinel. She walked over and picked it up, folded it carefully, and laid it on the nightstand. Not out of shame, but because tomorrow when she walked into the boardroom, she would wear the same thing. Same hoodie. Same woman. Different message. The next morning, the sun hadn't yet crested over the Charlotte skyline when Denise Hollister stepped into the boardroom of Crescent Oaks. It was 6:45 a.m., 15 minutes earlier than anyone expected. She didn't knock, didn't pause. She opened the door like she owned it, because she did. The room was quiet save for the gentle hum of the ceiling lights and the shuffle of papers. A junior associate looked up, eyes widening at the sight of her hoodie, the same one from the night before. Faded olive green, soft at the seams. Ordinary, but today it wasn't just a garment, it was a statement. The boardroom was glass-walled, a view of the city below unfolding like a model set. Around the table sat 6 men and 2 women, all of them freshly pressed briefcases, open phones out. They weren't surprised to see Denise, but they weren't ready for what followed. Natalie Fong stood from her seat. "Good morning, Ms. Hollister." Denise nodded and took the chair at the head of the table. She didn't open her laptop. She didn't reach for her notes. She looked up, calm, unshaken. "Before we begin Q4, she said evenly, "I want to talk about what happened last night." The room stilled. Ben Murray, seated near the end of the table with his tie a little too tight and eyes a little too tired, straightened his back. Kayla wasn't in the room. Denise had requested that. This conversation wasn't about a single employee. It was about a culture. "I walked into this hotel dressed the way I always dress when I travel. Quiet, comfortable, no pretense. And I was told I didn't belong." She didn't raise her voice. "I was asked if I had a reservation, then told there was no room for me. I was asked to leave the lobby I built." Someone cleared their throat down the table. No one else moved, and it would be easy to call this a mistake, an isolated moment, but we all know better. Her eyes swept across the table, not angry, just firm, measured. "This hotel is mine in name, but what happened in that lobby proved it doesn't reflect my vision. Because in my vision, Crescent Oaks is more than luxury. It's access, it's dignity, it's recognition." She leaned back slightly. "If your staff only sees power when it's dressed in a suit and tie, then we haven't trained them. We've trained you silence. So I want new onboarding. I want bias training. I want role-play scenarios where power doesn't come in a Rolex." Her voice sharpened, slightly cool steel beneath velvet. "And I want to lead it myself." Natalie gave a slight nod, almost involuntary, like a soldier recognizing rank. The man beside Ben shifted uncomfortably. "We understand, Ms. Hollister." Denise turned to him, her tone soft but surgical. "Do you?" He blinked. I believe we can." "You believe I need you to know. I don't want apologies. I want alignment." No one spoke. Outside the boardroom, a housekeeper pushed her cart past, humming softly. Denise glanced out the glass wall, then back to her team. "I'll be downstairs in the staff meeting at 9 a.m. I want every employee who works the floor to hear from me directly. Not because I need to explain myself, but because I want them to know I see them." She rose from her seat. The chair didn't creak. Her hands didn't shake. Meeting adjourned, and with that, she walked out. Same hoodie, same silence. But this time, no one doubted who she was. Not anymore. Downstairs, the staff lounge had never been so full. Housekeepers still in uniform, kitchen workers with flour on their sleeves, bellhops shifting from foot to foot, and there by the front, Denise. No stage, no podium, just her. She spoke simply. honestly about her story, about being overlooked, mistaken, minimized, about the power of stillness, about how true leadership isn't loud but unmistakable. And when she finished, no one clapped right away. They just stood there listening, feeling something shift, and that shift wasn't noise. It was recognition. That evening, as the sun bled orange behind the skyline, Denise sat alone in the executive garden, a mug of tea in her hand. A housekeeper passed, then doubled back. "Miss Hollister?" she asked quietly. Denise looked up. "Yes." The woman smiled softly. "Thank you." Denise tilted her head. "For what?" "For showing them what power looks like." Denise smiled. "Just once." "Power looks like you." To the woman nodded and walked off. And Denise leaned back in her chair, hoodie wrapped around her shoulders, letting the dusk settle around her like armor. The lights in the Crescent Oaks Grand Ballroom were low and golden, casting a soft shimmer on every polished surface. Silver trays, champagne flutes, and the glinting cufflinks of men who had never once been denied entry to a place like this. The carpet was deep navy absorbing sound, like velvet jazz floated gently from a live trio near the corner. Waitstaff in pressed uniforms glided between the crowd like ghosts balancing trays of lamb bites in chilled rows. And Denise Hollister stood alone at the far end of it all. She'd arrived early, not to be seen but to watch. No name tag, no spotlight, no announcement. She blended into the edges of the room, wearing a sleek black cocktail dress and that same olive hoodie she wore the night she'd been denied entry to her own hotel, draped casually over her shoulders like a silent reminder. It didn't clash with the occasion, it challenged it. This was her building, her ballroom, her gala. The investor relations event was something she'd conceptualized years ago, not because she liked galas, but because she knew what capital respected: optics, exclusivity, and the illusion of access. Give them an open bar, a few local politicians, and a stage lit just right, and they'd pour millions into your next expansion. Tonight should have been her moment, a celebration of everything Crescent Oaks had become. But Denise wasn't interested in celebration. She was here for clarity. Would they see her without the title? Would they recognize the face that had built the floor beneath their Ferragamos? The first answer came quickly. A man in a pale blue tuxedo bumped her shoulder without apology as he reached for a flute of champagne, not bothering to glance her way. He turned immediately to speak to someone else, assuming she was part of the staff. Then came a well-coiffed woman with a string of pearls so long it grazed her belt. She smiled at Denise in that tight, patronizing way people reserve for the help sweetheart. "You should check in with catering. Guests aren't supposed to mingle until after the speech." Denise didn't correct her, just blinked slowly and said nothing. The woman's eyes lingered on the hoodie, then darted away as she rejoined a group of donors, laughing too loud near the bar. The moments piled up like falling cards. A junior associate from Marketing One, Denise had signed a reference letter for last spring, walked past her without recognition. A bartender gave her water in a plastic cup. Then the real blow came. She was standing near the hors d'oeuvre table, contemplating whether to leave, when a voice behind her cut through the air like a fork on porcelain. "Careful there, sweetheart. That table's for guests," she turned. He was tall, mid-50s, white with a face like a real estate billboard, tan, square-jawed, perfectly unmemorable. The name tag read Spencer Grant, Horizon Equity, Regional Development. Denise said nothing. He laughed. "I mean, unless they're letting the kitchen crew drink champagne now, in which case, cheers." He raised his glass in mock salute and walked off before she could reply. Not that she planned to, not in that moment, not in that room. Instead, she stood still. Her fingers curled slightly around the stem of the untouched champagne glass. Her back straightened just enough to hide the crack in her chest. She wasn't embarrassed. She was furious, but not the kind of fury that boils over, the kind that sinks low and cold and ancient, because this wasn't new. She had walked into this moment 100 times in 100 different rooms. The real shame wasn't Spencer. It was that no one else noticed. Or worse, they noticed and didn't think it mattered. She felt it rising inside her. The question she never stopped asking. How many more rooms do I have to build before I'm allowed to stand in one without being mistaken for the help? Across the ballroom, Tanya Rivera stood mid-conversation with two mid-level investors and a city councilman when she caught the look on Denise's face. She recognized it instantly. It was the look a black woman gave when she'd just been erased in public in plain sight and by someone who didn't think twice about it. Tanya excused herself without apology. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she crossed the room with measured grace. She stopped in front of Denise and lowered her voice just enough for her alone. You good Denise didn't answer at first. Her eyes remained fixed on the center of the room, where Spencer now laughed with a group of men slapping shoulders, tossing back his drink, utterly unaware. Then she turned to Tanya and spoke in a voice so even it could have been mistaken for peace. He thought I was catering. Tanya didn't blink. She just gave a short, sharp nod. Stay here. And without another word, she pivoted and began walking directly toward Spencer Grant. Each step, a quiet reckoning unfolding in heels. Spencer Grant didn't see her coming. Tanya Rivera moved like purpose wrapped in silk, calm, unbothered, untouchable. She navigated the ballroom floor with the grace of someone who had spent her whole life having to learn how to walk through fire without being burned. The moment she reached Spencer's circle of backslapping, bourbon-sipping bravado, she inserted herself with surgical precision. Mr. Grant, he turned toward her slightly confused, then smiled when he registered her face. Tanya Wright. With corporate something? Legal affairs, she said smoothly. Eyes never leaving his. He chuckled. Ah, right. Well, great event, really impressive venue. Tanya tilted her head. I imagine you think so. Especially since you just insulted the woman who designed it. Spencer blinked, the smile faltering. I'm sorry. Denise Hollister, Tanya said slowly, enunciating each syllable as if introducing royalty owner, founder visionary behind Crescent Oaks. You mistook her for catering, called her sweetheart, mocked her for being near the guest table. He laughed nervously, shifting his weight. Oh, come on, I didn't wait. She that woman in the hoodie? Yes, Tanya said flatly. That woman in the hoodie? Sure, as Spencer straightened. Okay, look, I didn't know who she was. If she's not wearing a badge. Tanya stepped closer, just enough for her voice to lower into something sharp and precise. You didn't need a badge to know she was someone. You just needed curiosity or humility, or maybe to stop assuming black women in hoodies don't own the buildings you get drunk in. He recoiled slightly. All right, no, need to get dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being direct, Tanya interrupted, her eyes like ice over steel. And for your sake, I hope you're better at due diligence in your portfolio than you are in person. The men around Spencer had grown quiet. One cleared his throat. Another stepped away. And Spencer, now visibly rattled, tried to smooth the moment over with a weak chuckle. Tell her I'm sorry. It was a misunderstanding. Tanya leaned in, voice low and lethal. She doesn't need your apology. She's seen 1,000 men like you. What she hasn't seen enough of are people who say something after, like I just did. Then she walked away, just like that. Across the ballroom, Denise had watched it all unfold. She saw the shift in Spencer's posture, the way Tanya stood, the way the men around them grew still, suddenly unsure of how to breathe in a room that no longer centered them. But Denise didn't smile, because it wasn't over. She knew that public shame rarely led to private reflection. What mattered wasn't Spencer's reaction. It was everyone else's, the staff, the other investors. The ones who'd watched said nothing and stayed comfortable in their silence. This night had exposed something deeper than insult. It had exposed a pattern, and Denise was tired of patterns. 10 minutes later, the house lights dimmed and the stage lit up. A voice from the speakers boomed, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the founder and CEO of Crescent Oaks Hospitality, Miss Denise Hollister." There was a pause, confused glances, whispers. Then the crowd parted like water as Denise walked slowly, deliberately up the central aisle, still wearing the hoodie, still holding the same champagne glass. When she reached the podium, she paused, looked out across the sea of unfamiliar eyes, suddenly trying to place her face, trying to backtrack their assumptions. She let the silence settle, then leaned into the microphone. "Good evening." The room responded with scattered applause, too. Hesitant, too late. "I see a lot of new faces here tonight, and I'm sure some of you didn't realize you'd already met me." That got their attention. "See, I arrived early. No name tag, no assistant, no announcement, just me. Walking around. Listening, observing." She took a sip from her glass, and I noticed something strange. The more casually I dressed, the more invisible I became. Nervous laughter, fidgeting. Denise smiled, just barely. "It's funny, isn't it? How quickly people reveal what they believe power looks like, what leadership should wear, who they think is worth greeting, and who they assume is here to clear plates." The room had gone quiet again. Tonight was never just about investments. It's about vision. And a vision is only as strong as the people who can see it, even when it's wrapped in a hoodie. She let that sit, let it sting, then stepped back from the mic. No rousing conclusion, no applause line, just truth, unfiltered, undeniable. The silence that followed Denise's final words was so deep, it swallowed the sound of the jazz trio as they tried to restart a soft tune in the corner. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. One man near the bar slowly lowered his glass of Pinot Noir, as if unsure if he had permission to sip it. Now Denise stood tall at the podium, not basking, not performing, just present. She didn't need validation. The moment had already delivered what it needed to. Truth dropped like a stone into still water, rippling through a room not ready to confront its own reflection. And then slowly someone clapped. A woman in her 30s, seated with a diverse nonprofit delegation near the back of the ballroom, stood and clapped again, harder this time. Then another and another, until the room gave in to the pressure of conscience and joined. Applause spread like reluctant fire. It wasn't celebration, it was acknowledgement. And for Denise, that was enough. She stepped down from the stage and walked back through the room, the crowd parting again. But this time it wasn't out of dismissal, it was deference. The kind you can't buy or brand, the kind you earn one quiet war at a time. Tanya waited near the side wall, a smile tucked behind her eyes. "You good?" she asked again, echoing her words from earlier. Denise exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. "Better," she replied. They stood there together for a moment, just watching the room churn, like two generals observing a battlefield after a storm. Later that evening, the ballroom began to thin out. The clinking of glasses softened. Laughter returned, tentative but recovering, as people slipped into post-event small talk and phone checking. But something lingered in the air. Something no amount of orchestral jazz or artisan desserts could quite wash away the weight of being seen after refusing to disappear. Spencer Grant remained in the room, nursing his third drink, face drawn in quiet humiliation. He didn't approach Denise. He wouldn't. There wasn't a script for that. No PR-approved line to untangle what he'd exposed in Denise. She didn't need an apology, not from him, not from anyone who had made her feel like a stranger in her own empire. She stood now by the same refreshment table where she had been humiliated hours before. Her fingers rested on the edge of the linen cloth, the same way they had earlier, only this time she wasn't standing alone. A young black woman approached cautiously. mid-20s natural curls pinned neatly back, wearing a simple black dress and flats. Ms. Hollister, Denise turned. Yes, I wanted to say, thank you. Denise tilted her head gently. For what? For not letting it slide, for saying it out loud in front of them. The woman hesitated, then added, I'm a new analyst with one of the real estate groups. First time at something like this, I didn't think I'd see anyone who looked like me in that spotlight, let alone speak the way you did. Denise smiled soft and sincere. You belong here. You don't have to prove it to anyone. The woman nodded, visibly moved. I'll remember that. They exchanged no more words. They didn't need to. Some lessons didn't require lectures, just a moment. Just a woman in a hoodie refusing to shrink. An hour later, the ballroom was nearly empty. Denise stepped out into the night air behind the building, where the skyline shimmered like quiet approval. Her car waited at the curb, engine humming low. She didn't get in right away. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool night, remembering the first time she dared to imagine herself in a space like this. Not as a guest, not as a vendor, but as the architect. That girl had been 19, working part-time at a budget inn off I-95, scrubbing bathrooms between community college classes. She'd worn hand-me-downs and dreamed of marble floors. She'd served drinks in silence and watched men sign deals that determined futures. Now she was the future. The hoodie still rested over her shoulders, and this time no one had asked her to take it off. No one had told her she didn't belong, and if they thought it, they didn't dare say it. It didn't come in a confrontation. It didn't come in a heated phone call or a slamming door or some dramatic public display. It came in print, a quiet assassination dressed in business language and plausible deniability. Buried on page 7 of the Carolina Market Review, a mid-tier regional business newsletter, known more for mergers and quarterly forecasts than corporate sabotage, a headline emerged that would shift the air around Crescent Oaks like a cold front. Concerns raised over executive conduct at Crescent Oaks Gala. No author name, no quotes. Just a source familiar with internal operations who described an incident involving a tire and unprofessional remarks from a senior figure during a high-stakes investment event. One paragraph went further. The individual in question reportedly made comments that some attendees found confrontational and tone-deaf to the nature of the occasion, leading at least one investment group to reconsider its long-term involvement. There were no direct accusations, no photographs, no official names, but it might as well have screamed Denise Hollister. She read it early at 6:17 a.m. while seated in her favorite corner of the courtyard garden, a place she'd designed herself, brick pathways edged with lavender and soft moss tucked away behind the west wing of the hotel. The air was still cool, her coffee untouched. Her phone buzzed with links, texts, reactions. A message from Natalie simply read, "They're making their move." She'd always known it would come. That the night she stood up in that ballroom and told the truth about what power looked like, about what it should look like, there would be fallout, but she hadn't expected them to move this fast or this quietly. They hadn't come at her with fury. They'd come with friction, small pressure in the shadows, just enough to cause doubt to grow like mold in a closed room. And just like that, the game had changed. When she stepped into the executive boardroom at 8:04 a.m., Tanya, Natalie, and the PR team were already seated, eyes low, laptops glowing. They didn't greet her with small talk. This wasn't a morning for pleasantries. They're trying to bury you in subtext, Natalie said flatly. Anonymous source. No hard claims, just poison with a polite smile. Tanya, cool and unshaken, pulled up her tablet, and it's getting traction. The story's already been picked up by 2 investor blogs and a LinkedIn influencer in our hospitality vertical. One of the PR associates, Jamal, a young black man in his late 20s, spoke softly. They're not saying you're unfit, but they're letting people assume it. Letting them fill in the blanks. Denise muttered, her jaw tightening. Classic, another team member added, And Horizon Equity is conveniently featured in the same newsletter, talking about commitment to traditional leadership excellence. That's not a coincidence. No one had to say Spencer Grant's name out loud. Everyone in the room already knew. Denise took a seat at the head of the table. She placed her phone face down in front of her and folded her hands. "What's the ask?" she said. Natalie inhaled slowly. "They want a public statement from Crescent Oaks leadership, something broad, neutral, a reaffirmation of company values, and a commitment to investor confidence." Tanya cut in sharper translation. "They want you to retreat, say nothing, look smaller, apologize for the tone, not the truth." Denise nodded once. "And who's behind the actual submission?" That was when Jamal shifted in his chair and pulled up an internal IT trace. He turned his laptop toward her, showing the email that had submitted the original story draft to the newsletter. The metadata didn't lie. Sent from Ben Murray Crescent, Hospitality Com. Device ID 0427A HQR4. Location Admin Office. Crescent Oaks. Charlotte. The room held its breath. Denise didn't blink. Ben Tanya nodded. "We triple-checked. It came from his login, his IP, his terminal. He routed it through an encrypted proxy, probably thought no one would catch it." Natalie added, "He's trying to set you up for a board challenge, leaking to the press, stirring up the investors, framing you as difficult to work with." It's subtle, but effective. Denise sat back in her chair, staring through the glass wall of the boardroom at the hotel lobby below. The same lobby where she'd once been told there was no room for her. And now the man who'd stood behind that desk was trying to push her out from a seat he never earned. "He's not just crossing a line," Denise said quietly. "He's cutting the floor out from under me." The next move had to be surgical. Ben Murray wasn't just a disgruntled employee with a bruised ego. He was strategic, calculating, and as Denise now saw, clearly dangerous. Not because of what he could say in public, but because of how good he was at whispering in the dark. By noon, Denise had reviewed a full communication timeline. Ben's internal emails flagged for keywords like optics, narrative, and executive concern. He hadn't outright called for her resignation, but his phrasing did something more insidious. Is our CEO's personal style becoming a liability in high-visibility spaces? We may need to reconsider public-facing leadership protocols in formal investor environments, the kind of lines that sound neutral if you read them fast. The kind that get men promoted for asking the tough questions. Denise forwarded the worst of them to Tanya and Natalie, with a single message: he's out. But firing Ben wouldn't be enough, because the truth was, Ben wasn't working alone. At 2:35 p.m., Denise met with the legal team. Not in the glossy boardroom upstairs, but in a private corner of her suite where the walls didn't have ears and the lighting didn't feel like an interrogation lamp. She sat barefoot on the window seat, hoodie sleeves rolled up, a black coffee cooling beside her. Tanya stood near the minibar, arms folded, watching as the firm's general counsel scrolled through an internal document that made Denise's stomach knot. It was a memo, unofficial, but circulating, title contingency framework, board transition options, Q1, Q2. There it was in bullet points. Identify interim CEO with broader investor rapport, minimize media fallout by controlling language, strategic evolution, not replacement. Utilize current events, gala controversy, as soft rationale for leadership pivot. Her name wasn't in it. Not once, but her shadow was on every line. Denise leaned forward. Where did this come from? The lawyer hesitated. Off-site printer logs from our corporate legal vendor. Someone inside Crescent Oaks submitted it for layout review last week. Last week, before the article had even dropped. Before Spencer whispered to the press. Before anyone publicly questioned her, they'd been planning it in advance, waiting for her to give them a reason. All it took was one speech, one hoodie, one moment where a black woman refused to shrink for their comfort, and suddenly she became the risk. She stood abruptly, walking toward the window. The skyline stretched beyond the glass, Charlotte looking soft and distant in the haze of late afternoon. Behind her, Tanya broke the silence. They were never going to say it to your face. Denise nodded slowly, because they knew I'd never let it happen if I saw it coming. So now what? Denise turned around. Her voice didn't rise, but it changed steel over silk. Now we make sure they remember who built this place. She looked directly at the lawyer. I want a full audit of every communication Ben Murray sent or received in the last 90 days. CCs, BCCs, Slack channels. I want records of every investor conversation that referenced me since the gala. I want to know who fed that story and who waited to see how it landed. She looked at Tanya. You'll handle messaging quietly, not to clean it up, but to signal strength. No apologies, no backpedaling. I'll draft a letter myself. We'll release it under the board's signature, but the language comes from me. Tanya nodded, a subtle smirk forming. I was hoping you'd say that. At 6:12 p.m., Denise stepped into the service elevator alone. She didn't take the private one. She didn't want the gold trim or the VIP keycard access tonight. She wanted the elevator the staff used, the one that smelled faintly of bleach and overworked ambition. She wrote it down to sub-level 2. When the doors opened, she walked past laundry bins and stacks of dry goods, past maintenance staff and kitchen workers and housekeepers, folding towels faster than anyone up top ever noticed. They didn't see her coming until she stopped in the middle of the corridor and said loud enough for all to hear, Town hall meeting tomorrow, staff only, mandatory. Heads turned. Brows raised, one of the kitchen porters, a young man with oil on his apron, asked quietly, With you, ma'am? Denise met his eyes. Yes, with me. Then she turned and walked back toward the elevator. The hoodie still clung to her shoulders like armor. The war wasn't at the front desk anymore. It was in the foundation, and she was done playing nice by 9:00 a.m. The next morning, the staff lounge on the service level was packed wall to wall. It wasn't a glamorous space, no crystal chandeliers, no curated jazz playlists humming from the ceiling, just fluorescent lights, coffee-stained counters, and chairs that had seen better years. The kind of room where most of the hotel's real work happened invisibly, out of sight, out of mind. But today it was the heart of Crescent Oaks. More than 50 employees gathered, housekeepers in navy uniforms, cooks in hairnets, maintenance techs with dust on their shoulders. Some clutched coffee cups, others just leaned against the walls. Their chatter was quiet, uncertain. They'd heard the memo. Mandatory staff meeting, led by her most, had only seen Denise Hollister in photos, maybe once at a grand opening or in a training video that looped on the HR portal, but now she was real, standing just 10 feet from the vending machine. Wearing the hoodie, no name tag, no podium, just her. She stepped forward slowly, letting the room settle. When she spoke, it wasn't loud, but the silence made space for her words. I know most of you don't see me down here much. A few nods. No one spoke, and that's on me. Her voice didn't crack, but there was weight behind it. I've spent the last 10 years building this company, from scratch, brick by brick, and somehow I still let it become a place where someone like me could walk into my own lobby and be told to leave. Now there were murmurs. Heads turned, a few eyes dropped to the floor. I didn't come down here to talk about that night. Denise continued. I came to talk about every night, every morning, every shift where someone in this room has been overlooked, dismissed, spoken to, like they're invisible. Her eyes scanned the crowd, finding the dishwasher with calloused hands, the concierge with a name tag that had faded from overuse, the young woman in housekeeping with tired eyes and a braid pulled too tight. The truth is, this place runs on people who don't wear suits, who don't get thanked, who make everything work while staying invisible. A beat that ends today. The room was still. Now Denise reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. She held it up not to read from it, but to show it was real. This is a formal policy change starting immediately. Crescent Oaks is launching a frontline leadership program, full scholarships for internal promotions, dedicated advancement funding, language support, emergency childcare credits. Every one of you will get the chance to move up if that's what you want. A ripple ran through the room, a few hands instinctively covered mouths. One woman whispered, "Jesus," under her breath. Denise wasn't done. "And we're restructuring reporting lines. I'm appointing a committee of staff, not management, to audit how this company treats its people, especially those of you working behind the scenes. That committee will report directly to me. No filters, no spin." One of the bellhops near the back raised his hand slowly. "Ms. Hollister, why now?" She turned to him, no smile but something deeper. "Because I let them make me forget who I built this place for." Another pause. "And I won't let them do that again." Across the hotel on the penthouse level, Ben Murray stood in front of his desk, red-faced, watching a courier deliver an envelope to his assistant. Inside, a termination letter, signed by the board, initiated by the founder. He sat slowly, like a man who tripped over his own ambition. No scene, no parting words, just a door closing behind him. At noon, Denise stepped out into the lobby. Not the staff entrance, not the freight hall, the main lobby, right where it all began. People watched her now, but not with confusion. With recognition, guests held doors. A new concierge smiled without being prompted. No one asked if she had a reservation. No one questioned the hoodie. She stood under the grand chandelier, its crystals catching sunlight like promises, and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. This place wasn't perfect, but now it was hers again, not just by name but by principle, by truth, by fight. She turned and walked toward the front doors. A young front desk trainee called out, "Ms. Hollister, you heading out?" Denise paused, "Just getting some air." The trainee smiled. "Should I let security know to expect you back?" Denise raised an eyebrow. "No need." Then she pulled the hood gently over her head, gave a small nod, and pushed through the doors, disappearing into the bright Carolina sun. The knock was quiet, but it carried the weight of something final. 3 taps is steady controlled. It was 7:42 p.m. and Denise Hollister had just begun to relax for the first time in what felt like weeks. Her shoes were off. Her hoodie hung loosely over her shoulders. The suite was dim-lit only by a low amber lamp in the corner. A Miles Davis record crackled in the background, filling the space with something slow and defiant. She had no scheduled meetings, no press calls, no investor check-ins. And after the week she'd had, that silence felt almost holy. Then came the knock again, sharper this time. She moved toward the door without rushing, her hand brushing against the security latch as she glanced through the peephole. Her breath caught. Standing outside with the same stillness as a granite statue was Ellis Hollister. She didn't need a second look. Uncle Ellis didn't do surprise visits. If he knocked, it meant the ground was shifting. She undid the latch and pulled open the door. "Uncle!" He stepped inside without speaking, coat still buttoned, eyes scanning the room like he was reading the temperature of the air. He moved like a man who had built rooms just like this and buried people in them. "Denise," he said finally, his voice low and sandpaper smooth. She closed the door behind him. Ellis Hollister was a legend not just in their family, but in boardrooms, banks, and whispers across the Southeast. In the 80s, when black men were still being told to stay in the service entrance of the real estate game, he'd bought the front door. Then the building, then the whole block. He'd never worn flashy watches or loud suits. Power, he always said, didn't shout. It walked in the room and waited. Denise had learned everything from watching him: how to negotiate without blinking, how to disarm a man with silence, how to sit still until the other side got uncomfortable and showed their cards. She'd taken his lessons, built her own empire with them. But Ellis had one rule she had rarely invoked when the walls start moving: call blood. Tonight blood had arrived. He took a seat at the head of her dining table, pulled off his gloves slowly, and folded them beside him. They crossed the line, he said simply. Denise poured him a glass of water, placed it in front of him. You read the article. He nodded once, saw the original draft before it hit print. My guy flagged it. She tilted her head. You still have someone watching the newsletters? Ellis allowed the faintest hint of a smile. I watch everything, especially when my name's on the foundation. He paused, then looked her straight in the eye. They're not just coming for your seat. They want the whole damn house. Denise nodded slowly, lowering herself into the chair across from him. I figured as much. Spencer was never smart enough to move alone. Ellis tapped his fingers once against the glass. He was bait. Ben's betrayal was the opening move. What they're setting up now is a hostile buyout wrapped in a PR bow. He slid a folder across the table. Inside emails, anonymized call logs, property acquisition records, even calendar screenshots. At the center of it all, Ridgeline Capital, a quiet private equity firm with a reputation for flipping boutique hotels, replacing local leadership and doubling profit margins at the cost of Soul 3. Crescent Oak's board members had recently had dinner with Ridgeline executives in Atlanta. On the same weekend, Denise was in Boston negotiating with a green hospitality startup for eco-certification deals. While she was building, they were plotting. They think you'll fold, Ellis said. They think they can make me. He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, voice low. They're wrong, but only if you stop fighting by their rules. Denise narrowed her eyes. What are you suggesting? Ellis unbuttoned his coat fully and leaned back like he had just lit a match. You built this place on policy and grace. That was the right thing to do. But now it's time to show them what the other side of a Hollister looks like. She didn't flinch. You mean the side that made people disappear in '97, he smirked. I mean the side that made Wall Street executives drop out of acquisition talks without ever explaining why A, beat fear real fear. That's what moves cowards who pretend to have convictions. Denise looked out the window for a long moment. The Charlotte skyline blinked back at her, unaware. She turned back to Ellis. So we play a new game. He nodded once. No, we stopped playing theirs. By morning, Ellis had turned her living room into a war room. Blueprints, org charts, scanned emails, NDAs, contracts. There were stacks of papers on the dining table, sticky notes on the glass doors, and a laptop open to a spreadsheet that detailed every board member's voting history. Over the past 4 years, Denise sat cross-legged on the couch, her hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows, reading line after line of internal communications that looked harmless until you connected the dots. Ellis pointed at a highlighted section of an email from board member Lucas Ridgman. This line right here. Perhaps we're due for a change in tone at the top. That's not casual. That's signaling he wants out, or, depending on who's buying, Denise exhaled, and he's one of the three at that dinner with Ridgeline. Ellis nodded. Ridgeline doesn't approach people without an endgame. They're moving to control the board, quietly building a voting bloc. They'll bide their time until just before the next fiscal vote. Then they'll spring the resolution. Frame it as a directional shift, a fresh start. While painting me as an outdated liability, Denise added, exactly, it was familiar. Denise had seen this tactic used on friends in the industry, mostly women and mostly black. Their firings were never framed as firings, just restructuring strategic pivots. A press release here, a quote about legacy there, all wrapped in soft language that masked hard betrayal, but this time it wasn't going to be quiet. Not on her watch. Tanya arrived around 9:15 with fresh printouts from HR and legal. She dropped her bag and got straight to the point. I did what you asked. We ran a private review of every NDA signed in the last 6 months. 4 of them were updated with additional language about post-executive advisory compliance. Denise blinked. What does that mean? It means they were preparing for your exit before the gala. She felt it like a sharp sting under her ribs, not just betrayal, anticipation. They weren't reacting to her leadership, they were laying the groundwork to bury it. Tanya looked over at Ellis, who offered a slight nod of acknowledgement. I take it we're past playing nice, she asked him. We're in the phase where kindness becomes weakness, he replied, and we don't survive this by hoping they'll behave better. Denise stood, walked to the window. The hotel was alive below them, guests checking out, valets opening doors, a server rolling a breakfast cart past the fountain. The illusion of order. But beneath that, a war for control. She turned around, her eyes sharper than they had been all week. What if we flip the script? Tanya raised an eyebrow. You mean, go on the offensive? Not just that, make this public. Before they were ready, rip the rug out. Ellis stepped forward. You're talking about a direct address, a statement. No, a story about what happened, about why it happened. Let people see the play before it unfolds. Tanya crossed her arms. The risk, they'll try to frame it as emotional, as damage control, Denise said. But if we lead with calm, with fact and with power, we change the conversation and the audience. Denise's lips pressed into a thin smile. The employees, the investors, the public, and most importantly, the next black woman who walks into a boardroom wearing a hoodie and refuses to explain herself. Silence settled for a moment. Then Ellis stepped to the table, grabbed a clean sheet of paper and wrote 3 words, own the narrative. By noon, the team was in full motion. Natalie coordinated with a crisis management firm she trusted from her DC days. Jamal in PR began drafting a 90-second video script designed to be released across all channels. Denise herself began outlining her message, no rehearsed talking points. Just truth, she would speak from the lobby, no teleprompter, no handlers. Just her voice in the very place where they tried to erase her. She would tell the story not as a rebuttal, but as a reckoning. And when it aired, there would be no walking it back. At exactly 4:00 p.m., the cameras began rolling. There were only 3 of them stationed within 10 angles, one wide shot capturing the grandeur of the Crescent Oaks lobby, one mid centered on Denise, and one tight angled upward just slightly so the world could look up to her. She stood where it all began, right in front of the reception desk, no podium, no backdrop of accolades, no branding banners, just her in the same olive hoodie they had once mocked, this time zipped up clean sleeves down to her wrists, standing like stone beneath the gilded chandelier. The room had been cleared of guests, only essential staff remained, many of whom stood quietly along the periphery, watching. Tanya gave the silent countdown with her fingers. 3, 2, 1, action. Denise took a breath, and then she spoke. My name is Denise Hollister. I am the founder and CEO of Crescent Oaks. Her voice was calm, unwavering, clear enough to cut glass. A few days ago, I gave a speech at an investor gala held right here in this lobby. In that speech, I spoke plainly about visibility, about power, and about the assumptions people make when they look at someone who looks like me. She paused, not for effect, but for honesty. What followed wasn't dialogue. It wasn't reflection. It was retaliation. Quiet, strategic. And coded articles began to circulate, questioning my leadership. Suggestions were made that I didn't fit the image of an executive, that my words were inappropriate for the setting, that I lacked professionalism because I wore this. She gently tugged on the sleeve of her hoodie instead of something more acceptable. She let that breathe. So let me be clear. I built this place. I negotiated every inch of this lobby. I sat at folding tables when this hotel was just a blueprint, and a prayer. I wore this hoodie the night I closed the deal that made Crescent Oaks a reality. If this isn't what leadership looks like to you, change your lens. Because I will not apologize for telling the truth. I will not shrink to make others comfortable. I will not pretend silence is safety. She stepped forward, not just into the frame, but into history. This isn't just about me. This is about every person who's been told they don't belong in the room they built. Every Black woman who's been told to soften her tone. Every employee who's been passed over because someone didn't see the fit. To those who think power is a suit and a handshake, you're mistaken. Real power shows up in a hoodie, speaks without fear, and doesn't flinch when the lights come on. She stopped. No music, no applause. Just a clean cut. Tanya stepped in front of the camera. We're done. The crew began to break down, but the people lining the lobby didn't move. They stood, still processing, until one of the concierge team clapped, then a bellhop, then the woman who vacuumed the rugs at 5 a.m. every day. A rising, honest applause, unscripted, unprompted, filled the space that had once been used to silence her. And Denise stood there not basking in it, but anchored by it. This wasn't her vindication, it was her return. By 6:00 p.m., the video was live. By 6:23, it had 10,000 views. By 7:45, it was trending on LinkedIn. By 9:00 p.m., national outlets were reaching out for interviews. And by midnight, Denise had 3 new investor offers in her inbox, 2 from women-led capital firms, and 1 from a Black venture group that had been quietly following her for years, waiting for this moment. She didn't reply to any of them yet. She just closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and stood by the window of her suite, watching Charlotte sparkle beneath the night. Behind her, Ellis sipped from a glass of bourbon and stared at the reflection of his niece. You just changed the temperature of every boardroom from here to D.C. Denise didn't turn. Good a beat. They forgot what happens when a Hollister stops asking to be invited. Ellis chuckled low and long. Now they'll remember. By Friday morning, the storm didn't knock. It walked in through the front door smiling. It arrived not with sirens, but with silence. The kind that fills a boardroom when a scandal is no longer deniable. The kind that hovers over email inboxes waiting for replies no one wants to send. At 7:38 a.m., the resignation of Lucas Ridgman hit Denise's phone via corporate memo, simple, sterile. After thoughtful reflection, I've decided to step down from my position on the Crescent Oaks board to pursue other opportunities. I remain proud of the work we've done here and wish the company continued success. That was it. But it wasn't the whole story. The whole story had broken 36 minutes earlier when a grainy yet unmistakably damning audio clip leaked to the press. It captured Lucas just weeks before speaking at a private dinner hosted by Ridgeline Capital, the very firm now exposed for circling Denise's boardroom like vultures dressed in tailored wool. In the recording, Lucas didn't bother lowering his voice. She's polished, no doubt. But let's be real, this industry has an image. Her being in that hoodie preaching about power and identity, that ain't the kind of narrative you take to a NASDAQ listing. Then laughter, clinking glasses. A woman's voice saying, let's give it time. She'll get tired. The clip spread across social media like kerosene hitting flame. Within 2 hours, the hashtags began to trend. Power in a hoodie Denise deserves, better legacy, doesn't shrink. By 9:00 a.m., the fallout was no longer just digital, it was institutional. Denise stood in her office on the 18th floor watching Charlotte unfold below. Through massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the city looked the same as it did every day. Gray steel streaks of early sun horns and motion and life. But beneath it, something fundamental had shifted. Behind her, Tanya and Natalie reviewed a flood of incoming statements. Companies, community leaders, former employees, everyone scrambling to get ahead of the narrative. To align with what had now become a movement, not just a moment, Tanya crossed the room and handed Denise a new report. You should see this. Denise took the folder and flipped it open. It was a live analytics breakdown of Crescent Oaks' internal morale surveys. In just 72 hours, employee engagement had risen 22%. Housekeeping satisfaction reports had spiked. Kitchen retention inquiries were up. Even valet services had noted a sudden drop in guest complaints. She looked up. "They're watching," she said. "They're not just watching." Tanya replied, "They're rooting for you." And then came the kill shot. At 10:47 a.m., Forbes broke a headline that sent ripples across every corporate desk from Charlotte to New York legacy moves. Quietly, Ellis Hollister acquires major stake in Crescent Oaks. It was brief but brutal. A 12% controlling interest had been purchased under a silent entity known as East Legacy Holdings, now confirmed to be backed by Denise's uncle, Ellis Hollister. Ellis had used old-world methods, favor swaps, backroom assurances, and one call to an Atlanta hedge fund CEO who still owed him from 1993 to flip control of shares that had once belonged to passive investors. He didn't posture. He didn't explain. His statement to Forbes was only one line: "We're not here to ask permission anymore." That quote alone was enough to push public sentiment into a new gear. Denise didn't need to campaign anymore. She was now the embodiment of unapologetic ownership. Ben Murray's fall came just after lunch. The board, now rid of Lucas and fortified with Ellis's voting power, convened an emergency meeting. The vote was called swiftly, 8-1, in favor of immediate termination, cause breach of internal ethics collusion with external parties and failure to disclose communications related to a known competitor. When the motion passed, Tanya, who had been asked to deliver the news as head of legal affairs, didn't gloat. She simply entered Ben's office with a manila envelope and 2 uniformed security staff. "Your badge is deactivated. A courier will bring your personal effects." Ben didn't argue. He didn't yell. He didn't even stand right away. Because the truth had landed days ago, this was just the formal echo. He walked out through the side service hallway, not the grand staircase he once admired, not the employee entrance he once dismissed, but the back quiet, out of sight, the same way he had once tried to erase her. From her office window, Denise saw him leave. She didn't smile. She didn't exhale in triumph. Instead, she turned back to her desk, opened a new file titled Equity Realignment Plan, Phase 1, and began typing. Because the fall of a man didn't mean the rise of a mission was finished, it meant the hard part had just begun. The real victory wasn't in the firings. It wasn't in the headlines or the hashtags or even the quiet resignation of Lucas Ridgman as he slipped out the back door of a legacy he thought he controlled. The real victory came on Monday morning when Denise Hollister walked into the Crescent Oaks staff dining hall and sat down, not at the head of the table, not behind a podium, but in the middle of a long, scratched wooden table, surrounded by people in worn shoes and stain-marked aprons. They didn't expect her to show, but she did. No cameras, no script, just Denise with her sleeves rolled, hands folded, and a yellow legal pad resting on the table in front of her. "Talk to me," she said. "What needs to change?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the dishwasher, Miguel, a father of 4 who'd worked the night shift since opening day, cleared his throat. "Honestly, that scheduling software's trash. Half the team doesn't get updates until they're already late." Laughter rippled through the room. Denise wrote it down. Then came Jasmine from the concierge team. "We get docked for being 5 minutes late, even if the hotel Wi-Fi is down and we can't clock in digitally." Another note, then it was Ron from maintenance, then Tasha from linens, then 3 bellhops. Then the overnight auditor who shared that her seat was broken and had been for 6 months. By the time Denise looked up, she had 3 pages of handwritten notes. Not complaints, truths. The same kind of truths she'd spoken on that gala night, the ones that made people in power uncomfortable. But here in this room among her people, those truths were seeds. She stood when it ended, shook every hand, and said the same line to each of them. "You're not invisible, not anymore." Back upstairs, the boardroom was humming, not with tension, but with purpose. Ellis sat at the far end of the table, his tie loose, flipping through a file of acquisition proposals. Tanya stood near the whiteboard, mapping out a new internal structure that flattened executive privilege and introduced rotating department leads a system that would allow housekeeping, maintenance, and culinary workers to sit at the decision table every quarter. Denise entered, placed the yellow pad at the center, and said, "Here's what's broken, and here's what we're going to fix." No one objected because now there was no debate about who led this company. She didn't need their permission. She had their attention. Outside, the narrative had shifted permanently. News outlets that once ignored Crescent Oaks were now calling her a visionary and a revolutionary in leadership design. Morning shows invited her to speak at business schools, wanted her to guest lecture. But Denise turned down most of them. She didn't need another spotlight. She needed infrastructure. So instead of interviews, she spent her afternoons walking the halls of her hotels, talking to doormen, peeking into kitchen prep rooms, riding service elevators with cleaning crews. She started a listening tour across every Crescent Oaks property in the region. Some executives thought it was a stunt, until she canceled 3 vendor contracts due to poor labor conditions discovered during those visits, and then quietly replaced them with local minority-owned service partners, paying above union standard: 1 email, 1 order, no press release. Real power doesn't announce itself. It implements. Ben Murray, meanwhile, tried to land on his feet. He floated resumes, scheduled interviews. But word traveled: in this industry, silence is a language. And Denise, she didn't have to blacklist him. She didn't have to say a word. The people watching her rise simply started asking, if she's the one who got fired, why is she still standing, and why is he nowhere to be found? By the end of the quarter, Ben had quietly relocated to a third-tier chain in Tallahassee. No title, no authority. Just another middle manager with a badge and a grudge. His fall hadn't been explosive. It had been surgical because Denise didn't believe in drama. She believed in consequences. By the time spring rolled around, Crescent Oaks had undergone a quiet revolution, a new community impact initiative, profit-sharing opportunities for long-term employees, and an internal review board led by frontline staff to monitor executive decisions for equity and transparency. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and every step was deliberate. Planned, earned, the final shift came quietly. No banners, no press conferences. Just a change in tone, a recalibration of power where people no longer whispered. When Denise Hollister walked through the lobby but stood a little taller, looked her in the eye and greeted her like someone they recognized, not just someone they feared or admired, it was the little things. A housekeeping supervisor leaving a post-it on her desk that read, "Thank you for seeing us." A line cook handing her a cup of coffee on a morning walkthrough, saying nothing, just nodding once. A trainee bellhop asking after orientation. "Is it true you wore a hoodie to the investor?" Gala, eyes wide tone, full of something between disbelief and inspiration. Denise had smiled. Yeah, and I'd do it again. She had become a symbol, but more importantly, she had become a blueprint. Other women in the industry started sharing stories of speaking up, pushing back. One regional GM in Nashville left a major chain after 15 years and cited Denise's video in her farewell post. A group of Black women in hospitality launched a mentorship coalition, naming it the Hollister Circle. What had begun as a moment of erasure had transformed into a nationwide mirror, forcing the industry to take a long, hard look at who got to lead, who got to belong, and who got to redefine the rules. On the first Sunday after the board restructuring, Denise walked into the Crescent Oaks Garden courtyard, the same space where she had once read that anonymous hit piece, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath her. Now the earth felt steady. She sat on a stone bench beneath a magnolia tree. It had just begun to bloom again. Fat white flowers like soft fists of resilience. Tanya joined her carrying 2 mugs of coffee. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the wind rustle the ivy, the faint clang of room service carts echoing in the distance. Then Tanya spoke. "You know you changed the map, right?" Denise looked at her sideways. "The hotel?" "No, the whole damn industry." Denise chuckled softly. "I didn't change it. I reminded them it wasn't drawn in ink, a beat. It was always meant to be rewritten. Later that evening, a board member sent a message to the group thread. It was brief, had dinner with Horizon Rep. They've pulled out of all current hospitality investments, told me, quote, that Hollister woman moves too fast. Denise didn't reply to the message. She just smiled. Ellis, reading over her shoulder from his chair in the corner, lifted his glass in a silent toast. You move fast now, he said, but you waited a long damn time to be seen. She nodded. Yeah, but I didn't wait to act. He raised his eyebrows in approval. That's why they lost. The next morning, Denise hosted a roundtable, not with investors, not with media, but with 15 women from Crescent Oaks properties across the state line level, staff, assistant managers, food service workers, janitorial leads, black, brown, white immigrant, southern-born queer, Muslim mothers' daughters. They sat in a circle, no hierarchy. She called it the first room, because for so many of them, this was the first room where they were invited to speak without proving themselves first. She began with a question. What's the one thing no one has asked you but should have? One by one, they answered. Stories poured out about not having locker space, about being told to smile more, about being written up for defending themselves from rude guests, about hiding pregnancies to keep shifts, about holding down 3 jobs just to afford daycare. Denise didn't offer instant fixes. She offered attention, and where most CEOs would have turned those notes into action items for assistants to handle, Denise turned them into her next keynote. 2 weeks later, she delivered it not on a stage in New York or LA, but in Atlanta at a regional hospitality convention that had never before featured a black woman as opening speaker. She wore the hoodie. She read those stories out loud. And when she finished, there wasn't a single dry eye in the house, because power, real power, had walked on stage that day, not as an abstract force, but as a black woman in soft cotton, holding the stories of the invisible in her hands. Like scripture and the industry, it finally listened. They didn't expect her to last the quarter. That was the quiet bet behind closed doors, that once the noise died down, once the headlines moved on, Denise Hollister would fade back into place. Tidy, contained, grateful for survival. But Denise had no interest in surviving. She came to reshape. And by the time the next quarterly report was released, Crescent Oaks wasn't just standing, it was soaring. Revenue was up 14%, employee retention hit an all-time high. Customer satisfaction ratings surpassed national hospitality benchmarks, but those weren't the real numbers that mattered. What mattered was that every single internal promotion that quarter came from within frontline departments. What mattered was that staff input had been directly written into operational protocols. What mattered was that for the first time in company history, the board received feedback from housekeepers and maintenance workers on executive decision-making. And Denise, she made sure everyone knew exactly how it happened. Not out of ego, but out of example. She started doing something strange for a CEO. She gave away time every Monday from 8 to 10 a.m. She opened her office doors to any Crescent Oaks employee who wanted to speak with her. No filters, no assistants, no hierarchy. They called it open hour, but staff had another name for it: the real meeting. The first week, 4 people showed up. By week 3, she had to expand into the adjoining conference room. No appointment necessary, no judgment passed. One dishwasher used the time to pitch a sustainability initiative involving water recycling in the kitchen. 2 weeks later, Denise implemented a pilot version at the Charlotte property and named the program after his grandmother, who used to rinse every dish twice with a single bowl of water in her Alabama kitchen. A 19-year-old valet came to tell her he'd been offered a job by a competitor, but didn't want to leave if there was a future for him here. Denise created a new role, mobility and access coordinator, and gave him a leadership pathway. A janitor named Colleen just wanted to sit in her office and talk about what it felt like to walk through life invisible. Denise listened, and when she walked Colleen out after the meeting, She made sure everyone saw her do it. The press kept calling Forbes fortune. The Wall Street Journal, one outlet, tried to paint her as the new face of corporate wokeness. Denise declined the interview. Another tried to ask her about the hoodie brand. She told them the hoodie wasn't a brand. It's armor, she said, for walking into rooms not built for you and refusing to bow. She saved her voice for different platforms, podcasts run by young women in tech, virtual town halls hosted by HBCUs, speaking engagements where the chairs didn't all face one direction. She said yes to the spaces where she wasn't decoration, where her words wouldn't be diluted to sound bites, where the message mattered more than the magazine cover. The board, once divided, now stood in full alignment behind her. Ellis had begun pulling back again, slowly returning to the shadows he preferred, but not before leaving her with a final gift, one she hadn't expected. One morning, Denise arrived at her desk and found a simple envelope marked Legacy. Inside was a signed deed for a plot of land in Durham. Ellis's first commercial investment back when he was 27 and still being mistaken for a delivery driver during site visits. A note was attached. I built this for myself. You'll build what's next for others. Start something new. No permits needed, Unk. She stared at it for a long time, then picked up her phone and called Tanya. We're starting a school, she said. Tanya blinked on the other end of the line. A what? A training academy, hospitality management development. For kids who look like we did. For the ones no one recruits. For the ones who wear hoodies and get mistaken for maintenance. A beat of silence. Then Tanya laughed, soft and proud. Let's write the curriculum. The name came to her one night at 2:13 a.m. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, a cup of cold tea beside a legal pad full of scribbles, mentorship tiers, campus layout, community partnership contacts. The moonlight slanted through the window, catching her pen mid-sentence when it hit her. She wrote the words slowly, deliberately at the top of a fresh page. The Hollister Institute of Hospitality and Leadership. It sounded official, but it felt personal, because this wasn't just an academy, it was a declaration. Within weeks, the plan was in motion. Denise and Tanya worked side by side, assembling a board of directors, no suits for show, just operators, educators, former custodians, frontline warriors. The very people who'd once been told they didn't belong in boardrooms now found themselves shaping one. The land Ellis gifted in Durham became the campus blueprint, a modest cluster of brick buildings surrounded by green space and wide walkways. Every classroom would be named after someone who had been overlooked in the industry. An unsung legend, Jamal from PR, offered to lead a media literacy module. Colleen from janitorial joined to teach facility integrity and respect, a course about care pride in space ownership. And the 19-year-old valet, he came back to help design the transportation and mobility access program. People didn't just show up. They returned not because they were paid, but because Denise had done the one thing most leaders never dared to do. She made space. While the Institute took shape, Crescent Oaks kept evolving. Guest reviews were no longer just about the spa or the views. They praised how the front desk made them feel like family, how the housekeepers moved with purpose and pride. One woman from Chicago wrote, I've stayed in 5-star hotels from London to Dubai, but this was the first time I saw a CEO walking through the lobby, laughing with the kitchen crew. That review got framed in the break room. No plaque, no marble. Just printed and pinned with a magnet on the fridge. Because that's where truth lives, in break rooms and loading docks and early morning walk-ins. Not in awards. Denise still wore the hoodie. Not every day. But often enough that it became a symbol, not of defiance, but of continuity. She wore it when she visited the Raleigh site and handed out lunch to the construction team. She wore it when she spoke at a high school career day, standing in front of a room full of black and brown kids with dreams too big for their zip codes. She wore it the day she walked through the old Crescent Oaks sub-level and saw a new employee mural painted across the back wall, a timeline of hotel history in bold, colorful strokes, ending in a tall, faceless figure in a green hoodie holding open a door. Someone had written in Sharpie next to it. The door stayed open. Denise didn't cry, but she stood there a long time. Long enough for one of the custodial interns to walk past, pause, and say, "That's supposed to be you, right?" She turned, smiled. "Nah, that's all of us." And the board, they now followed her lead, not just out of respect, but because the numbers backed her vision. Crescent Oaks had expanded its equity portfolio, launched new properties in Detroit and New Orleans, and established a formal diversity audit committee that had already been adopted by 3 competing hotel chains. But for Denise, the real numbers were smaller, sharper, more intimate. She measured progress in thank you notes from parents whose kids were in the Institute's first cohort. She counted success by the volume of chairs added to open hour. She tracked impact not in dollars but in stories. Stories of growth, of return, of dignity restored. And in every one of them, she saw a version of herself. The version that had once been told she didn't belong in the building she built. The version that had once walked through a lobby full of cold stares. The version that had once been mistaken for someone else until she rewrote the rules. It was the Institute's opening day. Late spring sun bathed the small Durham campus in a soft gold. The air smelled of fresh mulch and blooming jasmine. New banners fluttered at the gate. The Hollister Institute of Hospitality and Leadership, EST 2025. A modest crowd gathered students, parents, press, and a quiet circle of former Crescent Oaks staff, now turned educators. Denise didn't speak from a stage that day. She stood on the steps of the main building named after her grandmother Amelia's hall and addressed the group like she was welcoming family to her porch. She wore a cream blazer over dark jeans, but beneath it all, the olive green hoodie still peeked out from beneath the lapel, not hidden, anchored. "This isn't a school built to fix you," she began. "You're not broken. You're not missing polish. You don't need permission to lead. What you need and what we're giving is a platform, a map, a room with your name already on the door." The students, ranging in age from 18 to 41, stood a little straighter. "And when someone asks where you learned to lead," like that, Denise added, voice warm and sharp, "tell them I learned it from the housekeepers, from the bellhops, from the dishwashers, from the people no one saw until they ran the place." Applause rose slowly, then thundered. In the back row, Ellis stood quietly with his arms folded, watching his niece change an entire industry again. 2 months later, Denise was invited to a roundtable hosted by a national hotel alliance. The kind of summit where CEOs smiled politely, took notes they'd never read, and shook hands in rooms that never welcomed challenge. But Denise didn't play that way anymore. She wore the hoodie. She sat at the head of the table, uninvited but undeniable. When the moderator turned to her and asked, half chuckling, "What's your big takeaway from this incredible year?" she didn't hesitate. "My big takeaway," she repeated, tapping the table lightly, "that power doesn't have a uniform and leadership doesn't need permission." The room stilled. A few executives shifted in their seats. "Too many people wait to be told they're allowed to rise." She continued, "I stopped waiting. I walked in wearing what I had and built what I needed." Another pause. And then I left the door open for whoever needed it next. There was no applause this time, only respect. The kind you don't perform but feel. Later that night, back in Charlotte, Denise sat alone in the Crescent Oaks garden courtyard. Same bench, same breeze. The moon hung low, caught in the limbs of the magnolia tree. Tanya had gone home. The building was quiet. The city hummed in the background, alive and unaware. Denise leaned back, hoodie zipped up against the chill arms, crossed like a woman finally at ease. Not because the fight was over, but because she owned her pace now. Her phone buzzed. A text from Colleen, the janitor turned instructor at the Institute. "Had a student tell me today she never thought someone with her skin and her silence could lead. I told her she was already leading, just hadn't been told yet. Denise smiled, typed back, "That's the lesson." Then she put the phone away, closed her eyes, and listened. Not to the chaos, not to the news, not even to her thoughts. She listened to the quiet, the same quiet that once made her feel invisible. Now it sounded like peace 1 year. That's how long it had been since Denise Hollister walked through the doors of Crescent Oaks and was told politely, professionally, and without hesitation that she didn't belong. Since a young woman behind the desk wearing a tight blazer and tighter assumptions had looked her dead in the face and tried to redirect her toward the service entrance. 12 months ago, Denise had swallowed that moment, not out of fear, but because she was calculating. And when she moved with purpose. Now, exactly 1 year later, the world had changed, or maybe the world had just caught up. Either way, Denise wasn't interested in celebrating. She was interested in honoring the path and walking it once more. So she woke up before the sun laced her sneakers and reached for the same olive green hoodie that had become something more than fabric. It was worn now, the cuffs soft, the threads at the seams a little loose, but it was still hers. Still true. She zipped it halfway, tucked her hands into the front pocket, and stepped into the dawn. The Charlotte air was cool, gentle, laced with the smell of pine and fresh rain on asphalt. The streets were quiet, the city still stretching itself awake. Denise walked alone, not because she had to, but because she chose to. There were no headlines this morning, no board votes, no crises to diffuse, just her and the silence, and that in itself was sacred. She passed the corner bodega where she used to buy her late-night snacks back when her apartment was still just a place to sleep between shifts. The old man behind the counter waved from inside. She nodded back, same as always. Past the light rail, a woman pushing a stroller glanced up, did a double take, then smiled wide. "You're that lady," the hotel boss. Denise grinned. "That's me." "Thank you," the woman added. No explanation, just that. Denise kept walking. She didn't need to ask what it meant. By 7:15, she arrived at the small cafe she used to haunt before the meetings, before the power suits, before the title on her email signature meant anything to anyone. It was still there, same hand-painted sign, same squeaky hinge on the front door. Carla, the owner, hadn't aged a day. "Well, well," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "The hoodie returns," Denise chuckled and took a seat at the corner table, her old spot. "One latte, double shot, oat milk." Carla gave her a mock salute. "Look at you still, too bougie for dairy. Some things never change." When Carla returned with the drink, she placed it gently in front of her, then sat across the table. "You okay?" The question caught her a little off guard. Denise paused, wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "I'm steady," she said finally. "Not chasing, not hiding, just walking." Carla smiled. "Good, you've earned your walk." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the hiss of the espresso machine and the occasional rattle of a plate being stacked behind the counter. Then Carla reached across the table, patted Denise's hand. "You didn't just make space, you made a lane." Denise nodded once, took a sip. "Now I'm making sure it stays open." She left the cafe just before 8:01 and walked the 8 blocks to Crescent Oaks. The hotel shimmered in the early sun, its white stone gleaming against the backdrop of new green leaves and morning bustle. Above the glass doors, the new sign stood proudly, "Crescent Oaks, a Hollister legacy property." A phrase that didn't just mark ownership, it marked intention. She stepped through the revolving door and into the lobby where the rhythm of morning life was already in motion. Guests checking out bellhops, maneuvering carts, the scent of fresh ground coffee swirling from the cafe inside. But this time, everything was different, because this time, no one hesitated when they saw her. There were no second glances, no clumsy reassessments, no half smiles of surprise. She had walked this lobby 1,000 times, but now she didn't just move through it, she owned it. Behind the desk stood Bree Young, composed with her curls tucked under a crisp Crescent Oaks cap and her tie just slightly askew. She caught sight of Denise and straightened instinctively. "Morning, Ms. Hollister." Denise smiled. "You holding it down. Always keep it that way," and she meant it. Because Bree wasn't just staff, she was the next in line. The next story, and Denise had made damn sure the ground beneath her feet would be solid. She walked past the concierge, past the marble staircase, past the glass sculpture she once debated installing because it cost more than her college tuition. Now it simply glimmered, like everything else in the room, silent, beautiful, unapologetically placed. She didn't stop. She walked on. Denise took the long hallway that ran behind the east atrium, past the old executive suite, and toward the newly redesigned legacy wall. Her idea executed not by designers in blazers, but by the night staff, the front desk crew, and the janitorial team. What once displayed framed awards and investment accolades was now a living mural of Crescent Oaks workers. No models, no glossy stock smiles, real people. A photo of Alma in her Navy housekeeping uniform mid-laugh, one hand holding a mop, the other pointing at something outside the frame. Underneath it, "I clean this place like my daughter's watching." Then Darian the bellhop with a gold tooth and gentle eyes holding the lobby door open as he helped an elderly guest out of the rain. His quote read, "Respect doesn't wear a name tag." There was even one of Colleen now in her Hollister Institute instructor badge, her boots caked in paint, standing proud next to a whiteboard that said, "We teach from where we've stood." Denise stood still in front of the wall, her reflection mixed with theirs on the glass. It was a moment she let sit, not for ego, but for grounding. Because this wall wasn't about her. It was about what happened when one person broke through, then refused to pull the door shut behind them. At 8:30 sharp, she stepped into the Legacy Development Hub, a sleek training and empowerment center, occupying what had once been unused office space on the hotel's second floor. Now it was a place filled with laptops, mentorship charts, chalkboards covered in bold handwriting and real stories. Today was orientation for a new cohort. 15 employees, valets, kitchen assistants, new front desk hires sat in a semicircle, watching a presentation led by none other than Colleen, who was mid-sentence when Denise entered. "Leadership is not about volume," Colleen said, pointing to the board. "It's about presence. You don't have to yell if your posture already says, 'I'm not moving.'" A few heads nodded. One young man, maybe 19, jotted notes feverishly. Denise didn't interrupt. She took a seat in the back, hoodie up quiet. Just another person in the room. Colleen glanced her way, smiled briefly, and kept teaching. When the session wrapped, Colleen gestured toward the back. "Y'all know who this is, right?" A few turned. One woman gasped softly, whispering, "Is that her?" Denise stood. No stage, no mic, just her. "You're not here because you're lucky," she said. "You're here because you have every right to lead. Whether that's on the floor or in the front office, your voice belongs in the room." She walked slowly in front of them, her tone steady. When they say be professional, they often mean be invisible. But here professional means powerful. It means prepared. It means you show up and you don't shrink. One trainee, quiet, slim, with calloused hands, raised her hand. "How do you know when it's working? Like when you're actually making change?" Denise paused, then answered slowly. "When the people who used to ignore you start quoting you in meetings?" Laughter. Then stillness. That answer hit deep. Back in her office, Denise reviewed the morning reports. The hotel had just been named one of the top 25 best places to work in the Southeast. But more importantly, the internal data showed what she cared about most: 37 frontline promotions in the last 6 months, 12 employees enrolled in the Hollister Institute's leadership certification, 8 cross-department mentorship pairs, active 3 new Crescent Oaks properties set to open, all with local hiring initiatives already launched. She minimized the window and opened her group chat with Tanya, Jamal, and Carla from the Cafe Institute mobile units ready to deploy in June. First site, Robeson County. Within seconds, Tanya replied, "Rural reach, re-earn real legacy." Then Carla, "You built this like you brewed your coffee." Slow, hot, and strong, Jamal sent a gif of a crown landing perfectly on a black queen's head. Denise smiled, closed the laptop, and stood. She stepped out of her office and took the elevator to the rooftop garden, her quiet place lined with soft chairs and low planters where the air always seemed cleaner. The city stretched before her, Charlotte rising tall and gold in the mid-morning sun. She pulled the hoodie tighter around her frame and closed her eyes. She could hear the echoes of old conversations. Too bold, too loud, too black. Too much, but now. Now those voices didn't live rent-free in her head. They lived in her rear view. She'd turn whispers into policies, disrespect into performance metrics, and that old olive hoodie into something stitched with memory, resistance, and grace. Denise remained on the rooftop for a long time. Not because she was avoiding work, she had plenty waiting on her desk. Not because she was sentimental, she didn't often dwell in the past, but because up here above the noise, above the negotiations and the narratives, she could see what really mattered. She watched a bus roll down Tryon Street with an ad for the Hollister Institute plastered across its side, training tomorrow's leaders where they stand today. A teenage girl waited at the crosswalk, earbuds and reading the banner. She smiled. That was enough. Denise turned to leave just as a soft buzz came from her phone. A message, unknown number, no subject line, just a photo. She opened it. It was a picture of a high school classroom in Mississippi. A young black girl standing in front of a whiteboard mid-presentation wearing a green hoodie with "I belong here." Screen printed across the chest, the teacher presumably had captioned the photo. She said she wanted to do her senior project on you. Said you gave her the words when no one at home would. Denise stared at the screen, motionless for a beat, then typed back, "Tell her she's not alone. And she's not next. She's now." By late afternoon, she was back in motion, walking the lobby greeting staff by name, checking on a wedding event being set up in the ballroom, stopping by the kitchen to high-five the pastry chef who'd finally perfected his vegan lemon bars. The staff didn't flinch when she appeared anymore. They didn't scramble because she was part of the rhythm now, not the exception. The standard, she passed a group of guests near the elevators. One of them, an older white man in a navy sport coat, did a double take, then approached. "Excuse me," he said, polite, tentative. "You're the CEO, right, Denise Hollister?" She nodded. "That's me. I saw your video. The one about leadership. My daughter made me watch it twice." He hesitated, then extended his hand. "I want to say thank you. I'm trying to do better for her and for myself." Denise shook his hand firmly. "That's a good start." Then she walked away, leaving behind a man who once would have doubted her authority, now standing quietly in her shadow, humbled. Evening arrived with a gold sky and slow wind. She changed into jeans, kept the hoodie on, and drove herself to the Hollister Institute campus in Durham for an evening mentorship circle. It was informal, just a dozen students and a few facilitators sitting in a circle on floor cushions, sharing updates. One student, Jules, non-binary, 22, formerly a night shift barback, spoke with quiet conviction. "When I got here, I didn't think I belonged. I still don't at some days. But then I remember what Mrs. Hollister said, that leadership starts when you decide to stop apologizing for being seen." Denise didn't speak right away. She just nodded, listening. When her turn came, she kept it simple. You don't need permission to exist in a room. That's the trick they played on us, making us think we have to earn air. She looked around the circle. Breathe like it's already yours. She drove home with the windows down, the hoodie flapping lightly in the wind. No destination, just movement. And as she pulled into her building's garage, she caught her reflection in the rearview mirror. Not just the woman in the hoodie, but everything behind her. The girl who once waited tables, the woman who once had to explain herself, the boss who nearly lost everything for speaking the truth, and the one who built everything back stronger, brick by brick, soul by soul. The next morning before sunrise, Denise took her usual walk through the city, same hoodie, same silence. Only now when people saw her, they didn't look past her, they looked with her. And when she walked through the Crescent Oaks doors, the front desk greeted her, not with hesitation, but with joy. "Morning, Ms. Hollister. Welcome home." She didn't stop. She didn't pose. She walked like she always had. Only now the path stayed open behind her, wide enough for whoever came next. And that's the end of Denise Hollister's story, or at least this chapter of it. She didn't roar her way to power. She didn't throw punches or demand a crown. She walked slowly, deliberately wrapped in a hoodie that the world mistook for weakness. But what they didn't see was that she wore that hoodie like armor. She faced humiliation. She was silenced. She was underestimated. And in the end, she still stood. More than that, she turned injustice into infrastructure, turned disrespect into reform, turned being unseen into a spotlight she chose to share. That's what this story's about. Not revenge, not rage, but restoration. This isn't just Denise's story. It's the story of every person who's been told they don't look the part. Every Black woman who's been passed over, every worker who's been called background. To all of you watching right now, whether you wear a hoodie, an apron, a headset, or no title at all, you are enough. And you do not have to wait for someone to invite you to the room. You are the room. Now, if this story moved, you do something, like this video. If you've ever had to prove your worth in silence, comment below, what was your hoodie moment? When did you realize your quiet wasn't weakness, it was power? Subscribe to Silent Power Stories to hear more untold narratives of resilience, redemption, and real-world reckoning. And hit the bell so you never miss the next story that deserves to be heard. Denise's walk didn't end here, and neither does yours, because the hoodie walks on, and so do we. See you in the next story. Stay loud, even in your silence.